12 years ago, our founding fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Our nation was founded as an anomaly in defiance of humanity's worst tendencies. In eras when absolutism and authoritarianism, fear-mongering and fascism, tyranny and taxation without representation consumed other nations, Americans chose to reject the ideological trappings of our forebears. We chose government of the people, by the people, and for the people over the corruption and stagnation of imperialism. Over the decades, our nation would continue making decisive choices, and while we didn't always get them right the first time, Americans never turned our backs on the values that define our nation. First and foremost, that every American deserves life, liberty, and to pursue happiness under our laws. From our nation's beginning, one aspiration has remained constant. Americans have always believed that the American dream is big enough for all of us. America has always been united by a shared understanding of our founding values, even when we disagreed on how to interpret them. Values that, from Washington to Lincoln to Roosevelt, existed on the cutting edge of their period's unapologetic progressive ideals. But over recent years, our nation has sadly seemed to retreat from this unifying force. President Reagan once said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Every generation faces its battle when it is called to renew our pledge to the values that make our nation special and define the American dream. For our generation, I believe that moment is now. We are being called on to defend against attacks cloaked in false patriotism that strike at the heart of quintessentially American values and institutions. Popular sovereignty, the rule of law, and freedom of speech have come under attack, and it is up to us to respond. That means we must cast aside the disillusionment and detachment that have dulled our generation's political impulses. We must stop prematurely consenting to the extremist co-opting of American values and symbols. We must recall the wisdom that dissent is the highest form of patriotism, and that our values remain worth preserving. Extremists love to make generalizations about the values America was founded on to rob the rest of us of their power. Let's begin the work of winning the battle for the soul of our nation by re-establishing what those values mean exactly, with a little help from the Founding Fathers themselves. The preamble to our Constitution opens with the phrase, "We the people," in order to form a more perfect union, a clear indication that our nation has always striven for aspirational, democratic, community-based understandings of society. It goes on to list our nation's priorities as to establish justice and promote the general welfare, signs that our founders saw no socialist boogeyman in the establishment of safety nets to protect our less fortunate citizens. Our Constitution tells us to consider domestic tranquility and the common defense in creating a peaceful culture capable of standing up for itself and its values. Finally, our Constitution reminds us of our purpose to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, a powerful reminder that our nation was founded to safeguard the values of liberal democracy, and of our obligation to preserve this vision of our nation for our progeny. In recent years, the unfortunate suggestion that American values were intended as an implicitly religious extension of Western European Christianity has resurfaced. For clear evidence to the contrary, we might turn to John Adams, our second president, who explicitly wrote that the United States is not a Christian nation, any more than it is a Jewish or Mohammedan nation. We might also make note of the care with which President Washington avoided declaring a particular religious affiliation, or President Jefferson's repeated affirmations in support of religious liberty. When called out as a liberal, Jack Kennedy responded by reclaiming the rhetoric his opponents attempted to weaponize.
But if by a liberal they mean someone who looks ahead and not behind, someone who welcomes new ideas without rigid reactions, someone who cares about the welfare of the people, their health, their housing, their schools, their jobs, their civil rights and their civil liberties, someone who believes that we can break through the stalemate and suspicions that grip us in our policies abroad. If that is what they mean by a liberal, then I'm proud to say that I'm a liberal.
Not long beforehand, President Truman described how, even at his time,
socialism is the scare word they have hurled at every advance the people have made in the last 20 years.
Today, especially in light of recent New York mayoral primary results and some of the competing explanations for left-wing politics' recent shortfalls, feels like an especially prudent time to address the use of socialism as a scare word against advancements to materially help Americans.
Socialism is what they call public power. Socialism is what they call Social Security. Socialism is what they call farm price supports. Socialism is what they call bank deposit insurance. Socialism is what they call the growth of free and independent labor organizations. Socialism is their name for almost anything that helps all the people.
There is nothing unprecedented or un-American about decision-making intended to support us all, and we cannot continue to allow those who fail to recognize that long-held truth to deny it on the grounds of socialism. Our founders challenge us to lead through government of, by, and for the people, not to forsake workable solutions to Americans' problems because they might bear a resemblance to a functionally extinct economic ideology. Abraham Lincoln, the greatest leader in the history of our nation and possibly the world, wrote that if any man tells you he loves America yet hates labor, he is a liar. If any man tells you he trusts America yet fears labor, he is a fool. Lincoln supported the values of American progressivism beyond his conspicuous identifier as the man who liberated enslaved Americans, and the American spirit from its original sin. Per Lincoln, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital, and deserves much the higher consideration. Our first and finest Republican president, hailing from a party then and now identified by its affinity for industry and business interests, took the side of organized labor in the class disputes of his day. Dr. King, who needs no introduction, gives us some of the most moving words on what American values can mean.
But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
In the same speech, King prophetically alluded to his assassination the next day.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
King invokes religion in a sense tasteful enough not to distract from his moral themes and powerful enough to lend his words the weight of righteousness. And I say that as one proud to practice faith very differently than King did.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
This land is your land, much as I appreciate King's previous use of Battle Hymn of the Republic, is my favorite patriotic anthem. I love how the oft-admitted fourth and final stanzas criticize our nation's falling short of the American dream. I love how directly the song reaches out to all its listeners. It proclaims that this land, America, and the principles that define it belong to all of us. I love how gracefully the song responds to more overtly patriotic media, which is all too often uncritically laudful, indistinctly derivative, or just insubstantial in its commentary. Most of all, I love that it reminds us that dissent is patriotic, that there is nothing un-American about loving this country enough to push its actions towards its principles. It's the perfect song for an honest, progressive reading of American values, and this piece wouldn't be complete without a reminder that regardless of whatever else might qualify our identities, this land was made for you and me, and it always will be. The great leaders of our history teach us that the American dream is big enough for all of us. Our country promises to be one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We might not quite meet those standards, but their promise is one worth keeping. A nation we can be proud of is worth fighting for. Donald Trump is on record describing his ideal vision for America as analogous to the Gilded Age, a period in our history when states literally legalized bribery, women couldn't vote, and Americans of color were lynched for standing up for themselves. It is up to every American to reject this archaic view and choose the vision of liberty, progress, and democracy that our founding fathers sacrificed their lives to uphold. I choose to reject the reactionary fantasy of Make America Great Again because I choose to believe that America's best days are ahead of us. I choose to believe that someday we will defeat the myriad crises endangering our democracy. I choose to believe that the spirit of the American people remains true to our values, and that the long arc of history and humanity bends towards justice. I choose to believe we can once again inspire our confused, disjointed nation into a vision of the American dream more complete, more inclusive, and more honest to our values than ever before. We do not have the luxury of getting lost in a sea of despair. This is our nation. These are our values, and they're worth fighting for. I will always believe in America, that someday we shall overcome. We might not get there in one term, we might not get there in one lifetime, but someday our people will get to the promised land. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless America.